My name is Peter Minnis. I'm a director of TODD Architects. We are an AJ 100 practice with studios here in Belfast, Dublin, London and Manchester. Oh, it's a long time ago now. When I was at school, I was always an interest in art and buildings, and I sort of fell into it in some ways in that I picked the perfect combination, I suppose, of maths, physics and art. No family history in it, as you often get in our profession, but I think just the love I had at the time of art and buildings. Our business was established in 1976 by a gentleman called Barry Todd, and that's where the name comes from. Barry's still living, still in his late 70s. We see him once or twice a year. An interesting character, but he was a real entrepreneurial architect. 1976 was the height of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, so you had 350 people being killed that year. I can remember in the early 80s, mid-80s as a young architect, sitting there drawing away, and sitting on my stool, and I'd be lifted off my seat when a bomb goes off, and then I'd sit back down, and I would go, that sounded quite loud, and I'd start drawing again, and you started to live with it. But to open a business as an architect during that period was an incredible achievement. He started as a sole practitioner, and we bought the business off him in 2000 and sort of built it up from that. That's a good question. I think in our business, in our practice, it's always been about making a difference and looking to design places for people. I think some of the most rewarding projects I've ever worked on are things, like schools and healthcare buildings where you really feel you can contribute to society and give something back. So that's some of the most enjoyable projects that we would have. The projects we work on, because of the size of practice we've about 90 people overall, tend to be large-scale projects. So the only thing we don't do is one-off houses. We do everything from, as I say, education work through to a lot of healthcare work, which I said is very rewarding. We also do a lot of office accommodation. That's been a big part of our business across the piece for the last while. And I suppose over the last number of years, the residential sector has been something which we've been involved in a lot, both here and in London. We've now delivered, I think, 7,000 homes across the UK and Ireland, and 2,500 of those in central London. Since I started, I was working this out for you, I qualified in 1987, so that's about sort of 36 years in this profession, and it's an extraordinary, the changes that I've seen over that time. I sound like an old dinosaur, don't I? But, I still draw. At that stage in our CAD was just starting. People were just starting to use BBC microcomputers, and I never got overly comfortable with that, so I still draw, personally. I still sit there with pens and scrape things out with a razor, and my young architects walk past and wonder who is that guy sitting in the corner, and they contrast what they're doing now, because what they can produce now is just extraordinary. That sort of, Revit modeling, 3D, I sort of walk past people's monitors now, and on one side I can sort of understand it's a drawing, on the other side it looks like a computer game, but it's just transformed our profession, especially over the last number of years. In terms of new things that I think are happening now, and one of the ticking time bombs in the industry is that we just don't have young people getting into trades. It really is a major issue in construction. I'm sure you've maybe heard that from other architects. So therefore there is, I think, a much greater move towards off-site fabrication. There's some beautiful brick buildings in Belfast. A wonderful, I use the example, there's a wonderful church in the city built in the 1990s. Where it was brickwork built on the batter and sort of on a 3-degree slope on the curve, by one guy, a guy called Tommy and his mate, built this thing. and it's a beautiful piece of architecture, won RIB awards, all sorts of things. But could you get anybody to do that now? I just don't know. Well, I say in terms of what I do, I mean, I love what I do. I mean, people, I think, always say to you, if you can find a job that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think that's a mantra which I've always sort of believed in. I'll come in here and rather than watching TV on a Sunday, I'll come in and draw and design. And even at the level I'm at now, I still want to get involved in design. But I would spend quite a bit of my time, you know, whether reviewing work by others, writing to contractors, preparing fee proposals. So it's an overseeing role. I also look after, say, we've got an office in Manchester and London, so I look after those, which is very interesting as well, because they're doing quite different work than maybe we do in Belfast and in Dublin. And I know a lot of my work now, for instance, is also trying to generate new business, which is always a challenge as well, because it's a competitive market, so you're always trying to, you know, differentiate yourselves from others. So I spend a lot of time in that, presenting to clients, making submissions, meeting planners, all those sorts of aspects, and deal making. But that's not the traditional role people think of an architect. You know, think it's designing, it's doing all that lovely stuff. But you've got to be a businessman as well. You've got to be able to run a business and understand that, you know, okay, you have finance directors, you've got people, you know, doing all this sort of stuff for you, but there's so many nuances. You've got to have a marketing department, you've got to have submissions people, so we're now a big animal, I suppose. I think it has, my experience over the time I've been in the profession has been massively important to have people that you can trust and products that you can rely on. And I think that's, again, part of the reason we do come back, for instance, to Weinberger, because in Northern Ireland you have a particularly great setup here where, you know, if we're looking for samples, they're provided very quickly. If we need some technical advice, that's provided as well. And I think that once you develop a relationship in that way, I think that it's hugely important, and it's something we rely on. And the fact that there's a quality product there, which you can rely on. Because the last thing we want is there'll be issues like efflorescence in brickwork, you know, which can be an issue, you know. So we want to make sure products that don't give us problems. It's interesting when I look back at my career and look at what the guys are doing now, is that you tend to find that when you specify something and it's a product that you're happy with and you've got a good service for you tend to default back to that specification. Okay, legislation will change, thermal regulations were changing as we know, buildings are going more airtight, but the general specification, if you can get that from a manufacturer and you're happy with it, we do tend to use that again, but again, it's that service. If somebody can provide us with an update and say, well, look, that has changed, there are new regulations have changed, you need to change your specification. But it tends to be products that, you know, that we've tried and trusted, for want of a better phrase, probably. Well, we do, yes. Well, we were involved. Yes, this is where I'm speaking to you now is Titanic Corridor, which was the home of Harland and Wolff, and of course where famously Titanic was built. And as they always say here, there was nothing wrong with it when it left Belfast. It's a beautiful building which we designed with Civic Arts, and certainly worth people visiting. Aluminium clad, sparkly. People say it looks like an iceberg. I'm not sure, but it's a building about the Titanic. And it was built. It was wonderful. The chap we designed was an American chap who's no longer with us, called Eric Kuhn, who had a company called Civic Arts. And Eric did a wonderful presentation, a big American character, did a wonderful presentation to the City Council, and his comment about Titanic Corridor, it's not about the rivets, it's about the romance. You know, well, that's how he sold it. But anyway, the area itself has grown. So we've done some lovely work down here. The Public Record Office in Northern Ireland is here. So we're doing new law lines development. We've done 2 or 3 office buildings. We've done the Belfast Metropolitan College. So we've contributed a lot to the area, which is our home now. It's a good question. I think it's always a balance where we don't have a house style per se. We always like to react to a brief, to a budget, to the context. So I think you have to look at it in its totality, as it were. But our work is. We are modern architects. We're quite contemporary in that way. We don't do pastiche of old buildings, but our solutions are very different when you look at them. You know, there is a certain maybe linkage in some elements, but we do try to give a client an individual response. So we'll never lift something out of a drawer. You know, and you do get that on occasion. Certainly the suburban housing guys will just lift out a solution. We will try to do something which is unique, and we'll always try to do it taking on the aspirations and the real vision that a client might have. We always love trying to give a little bit more, you know, and the brief can be quite black and white. But you know, you want to dig in behind it. What are the real aspirations? What's the vision here? What can we give that's something different? And our healthcare work, I think, is a great example of that. You know, where a lot of healthcare work is just about wards, you know, and pretty standard accommodation. We've done some beautiful buildings in this sort of field where our client, we had a client who would say, well, look, you know, when people are, you know, when you want to go away and you want to rest and recuperate stuff, you'll head off to a beautiful hotel somewhere in the sun, and it's great. So when people are sick, what do? They shove them into these dreadful institutions and horrible buildings and damp, dark things. And well, what I want to have in my building, my hospital, is I want that to be more like a hotel. You know, why shouldn't it be like that? So we've done some beautiful work like that. You know, healthcare buildings that have atriums within them and sort of things that you maybe wouldn't traditionally associate with healthcare architecture. And all clients are very different, and that's one thing I love what I do as well, because you know, sometimes I'm dealing with you know, a school or a headmistress, headmaster. Other times you're dealing with maybe a health trust. Other times you're dealing with a contractor, and they're all quite different. They're all quite different aspirations. Some of them are very money driven. Look, I've got a certain amount of money, I cannot spend more than that. Others are a bit more looser and say, well, no, look, you know, to get this right, I want to spend a bit more money. They're the nicer clients to get that sort of attitude.
Flexibility.
Yeah, a bit more flexible. But if you're in a public sector, you know, you've a responsibility. If we're building a new school or a new health building, that money's coming out of all our taxes. You know, so we do genuinely feel a responsibility there, that that you can't overspend. You know, you'll see regularly, you know, buildings in you know, the Scottish Parliament, for an example, of that, and the amount of money that was spent on that, where it just I think a bit too ridiculous. Yes, Riddle is the sort of the last of a number of buildings that we've designed and built for Queen's University. They are a Russell Group university, very, very well respected across the UK and globally. In fact, the management school at Riddle Hall is incredibly well respected, and Bill Clinton is one of their benefactors. The building is on a beautiful site, woodland site, and I said to our architects, if we cannot design a good building on this site, we should stop. I mean, it's surrounded by mature woodland, and part of the concept was that whatever room you were in, you would be able to look out into the trees. And I think that has worked very successfully. And the wonderful thing as an architect is that the client loves the building. I mean, we might love it, we might want to submit it for awards, that's great, but more importantly, the client is bowled over. The heritage aspect was particularly important in Riddle because there's an existing listed building on the site, an old Edwardian facility, and we wanted to pick up themes from that and to try to make sure the building sat comfortably with it. So we spent an awful lot of time trying to get the right brick. So we ended up with the Wienerberger Sovereign Red, which works wonderfully, sits beautifully with it, and mixed that with cast stone to reflect that sort of feel for the original architecture.